Here to talk more about the ASEAN Summit is Gregory Poling. He's a fellow in Southeast Asia Studies at the U.S. Center for Strategic International Studies. Thank you so much for joining us. One of the key issues discussed at the summit was obviously the South China Sea. Do you think anything was accomplished on this front?
Well, that seems to depend on who you ask. The statement that came out, the chairman's statement from Malaysia, was a bit stronger than what we've seen in the past. It did specifically address this question of reclamation or island building, but it didn't mention China by name. It certainly didn't meet the standards of what the Philippines and probably Vietnam were hoping as far as a united ASEAN front expressly calling out China.
What would you say was the biggest highlight of the summit? We mentioned the adoption of these three declarations. How important was that?
Well, this is part of an ongoing process. Malaysia wants to be seen as the state within ASEAN that is there at the beginning of this new ASEAN community. And to that end, this idea of a people-centered ASEAN that they put out, the continued progress is important. The other statements, we'll have to see what comes of them. It's interesting that there was a statement on climate resilience, and the issue of moderates. International moderates was clearly one that's of particular concern to Malaysia and also Indonesia, and to a lesser degree the Philippines, given how many of their residents have gone abroad to fight ISIS.
They did mention climate change and disaster is timely considering what's happening there in Nepal. Malaysia's Prime Minister said the ASEAN community has a plan to create a common economic, political security, and socio-cultural region. What does he mean by that?
Nobody is quite sure exactly what the socio-cultural part means. The real key here is the economic community. That's what everybody's looking for. They've already largely succeeded in bringing down tariffs on trade and goods. Now they're working on trade and services. Eventually, the idea is to have a single area, 10 states in Southeast Asia, with a free flow of goods, services, labor, capital, essentially turn it into something approaching Europe, but they are far from that. And the end of this year will just be the first step in a long process of bringing down trade and service barriers.
How effective could that be, though, with so many competing blocs and groups of trade, and some of these countries are members of others, but then you have this one bloc that ASEAN is trying to do on its own? Would that even really make a difference?
In theory, it can make a huge difference. You're talking about 650 million people, a very large market, and it would really allow ASEAN as a unit to kind of take its place as a major power alongside the likes of China, India, Japan, who are dominating Asia. That said, the vast majority of all of these states' trade is outside the region, with China, with Japan, and with the US. So they're a far cry from creating an actual economic bloc that could be a geopolitical force in its own.
All right, Gregory Poling, as always, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining.